The thinking that I've had, and it's not to say it's complete thinking, has really stemmed from being able to see how do we use sort of parallel thinking to what's gone on in the traditional world. Unlike many of the crypto anarchists, I'm constantly looking for ways to be able to take tried and tested ways of doing things successfully in other parts of industries or the world, and then see how we can apply it to what we're doing within crypto.
Today's episode concludes the Impact mini-series and moves us closer to the exploration of technology in service of regeneration. And to make that connection, we speak with Azeem Khan, a serial entrepreneur and a leading figure in the decentralized finance space, who also has led some noble crypto philanthropy initiatives, like distributing grants for digital public goods as head of impact at Gitcoin to consulting UNICEF crypto fund. I really appreciate Azeem's common sense and down-to-earth approach to Web3 and his call to move away from senseless ideological debates and focusing on working with the system, reaching across the aisle so that we are able to do good in the world while being well financially.
I really enjoyed Azeem's realness and the reflections that he provided on some of the key discussions we are having in this space, from the relevance of real-life events to the controversial Gitcoin shell deal. I think my favorite takeaway is that whatever you're working on or whatever you're building with, it's really worth investing in the long-lasting fabric of partnerships, support, positive sum collaborations, because it's not just enough to give grants or run events. It's not enough to try to do things yourself. And I think that's actually really regenerative. It reminded me of John's Fullerton episode where we talk about regenerative culture, not just in terms of natural ecosystems, but also how we think about building bridges, creating connections, and empowering people. Hello, Azeem. Welcome to the ReFi podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Azeem. Welcome to the show. So excited to have you. And for those of our listeners who don't know you, how do you usually introduce yourself?
I am the co-founder of an L2, of which there must be 200 at the moment. I'm a consultant with the UNICEF Crypto Fund. I'm a venture partner at Foresight Ventures. I am a columnist with CoinDesk and a contributor with Forbes for their digital assets section. And am very lucky that my wife doesn't hate me for all the commitments that I have professionally.
Love it. Oh,
yeah.
Well, maybe to learn a little more about you, what are some of the key values that draw you to Web3? And are there maybe some kind of influential moments, milestones, or even projects that really shaped your journey in the space?
So I got interested in crypto in around 2012. I had finished a master's in advanced biology and I was applying to medical schools between 2012 and 2013. And I was just sitting on Twitter a lot. I was working in a biotech company and started reading about this idea of decentralized currency and monetary theory and everything that comes with cryptocurrency. Back then, it was just Bitcoin, really. And it was just something that was interesting. I was following people. I was reading things. I was commenting on threads and just sitting with it. And then at the end of 2013, ended up writing an article for the Huffington Post about the New York City Bitcoin Center, which had opened. I went to a New Year's Eve party that they hosted and saw a large group or a mid-sized group of eccentric people who I then realized that this group of people was going nowhere and that crypto really was here to stay. And after that, I tried venturing into launching something in early 2014 with something called Kim Coindashian. And it was just really a big troll. At the time, there was something called Kanye West as well. And so Kanye and Kim were married at the time. And I was like, what better way to piggyback on press and media than to just play off with his wife's name? And in the process, got a cease and desist after we got a ton of media. But it opened my mind to thinking about things because as I did the interviews, I was like, wait, what if Kim actually had a coin? And some of it would call it social tokens, other would call it meme coins. It was in 2017, I was involved in what was going on during ICO. It's buying and selling and things like that, being part of random Telegram groups. And again, just something that I was dipping my toes in, but not full-time in by any means. And then 2019, I tried raising money for a crypto gaming company when VCs all laughed at me, telling me that crypto and gaming don't go together, and then you had to choose one or the other. And so I ended up in a mobile game that was like Pokemon Go for sneakerheads for 2020. And it was, you collect sneakers in the form of skins, you go out in the real world and take steps and do treasure hunts, and you earn in-game currency. You can power the shoes up, the shoes wear off over time, but it wasn't crypto. And so it was like a precursor to the Solana-based game STEPN, if you've heard of it. And we did quite well. I was on doing growth and partnerships, and we did 6-figure users in 2020. We did partnerships with Gucci and with Puma and with Adidas. We had Nike and Chanel send us cease and desists. But it was something that just only further like sort of continued to stoke the flames of me being like, I need to get involved in crypto full time. So early 2021, I raised money for a small crowdfunding platform for creators, and raised as a $1.5 million round, and built and launched that product. I had signed the wrong investor agreements. I didn't know what I was doing, signing or sending out sats to anyone. And so I just ended up stepping away from the project in 2021. At the end, there was a lot of things that had not gone the way that I was hoping to as a founder, and ended up being at Gitcoin. I had done Kernel, which is their 8-week spin-out program of cohort-based learning. And in that process, met Scott Moore, who was one of the Gitcoin founder, and ended up asking him one day about a social impact DeFi protocol I wanted to raise money for. And he said, that would be cool, but it seems like you have a lot of experience on partnerships. We actually need help with it. Would you be willing to come join the team? And so early 2022, joined Gitcoin, not intentionally by any means. And I really enjoyed the work. I enjoyed what we were doing. Scott was gracious enough, honestly, to open his entire phone book to me, basically. And we raised a bunch of money, did a bunch of great things. And then it was during that year, we mentioned UNICEF. They'd been chatting with UNICEF for a while, but they asked if I'd be willing to help lead that partnership. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me for sure, because seeing a brand like UNICEF want to get involved with crypto, learning that they had a crypto fund dating back to 2017, they were investing in companies, more so like a rigorous grants program, but giving money to companies that had gone on and were doing well for themselves. And we did the grants round. It had a pretty good impact. We had, tens of thousands of donors who came in. We ended up splitting of over $150,000 across 10 projects that were working on a bunch of things. And that sort of led me down like a rabbit hole and it was never intentional, but being on this philanthropic and ReFi side of things and seeing how nonprofits are, NGOs are, and how social impact is tied into what crypto could be utilized for. And so there's more, but just tying it to sort of that part, I'd say that was definitely the most pivotal moment, because my younger brother, who's more pro crypto now, was very into crypto at the time. Remember, he came to me the day we announced the deal and he said, I still don't understand crypto and it still mostly seems like a scam to me. But if UNICEF is willing to work with you, maybe there's something there that I don't understand. And so, and it was after that we had super cool inbound from all of the biggest organizations and nonprofits in the world. And it led to us doing something with the American Cancer Society later in 2023. And something we'll probably talk about is separately, but we had done a big deal with Shell Oil as well in 2023. So yeah.
Yeah. Wow. There's lots to touch on in there. And we're definitely going to get to some of the use cases for crypto philanthropy that you do a lot of work in. But before we get there, I wanted to go back to sort of through Web3 values, right? And this idea behind building this decentralized digital ecosystem without intermediaries that anyone can participate in, right? And a large aspect of this community is public goods, right? Digital goods specifically.
Yes.
And you write a lot in the space, and your recent article in CoinDesk talks about public goods funding specifically. And there you argue, and I quote, that you argue for transforming public goods into private grades. Can you elaborate on this point a bit? And also maybe start with saying, what are public goods to you in the Web3 context?
So traditional forms of public goods are, non-excludable, non-rivalrous. What that means in English is just like clean air. Everyone can use it. Like, it doesn't exclude anyone based on race, color, creed, ethnicity. And clean air doesn't like rival anything. And everyone just deserves access. Libraries, roads, tunnels, bridges, a lot of things that sort of as a society, we all collectively use clean water. And unfortunately that many of us in the world don't have, but should, right? And so and there's many definitions of this, but the way that I've looked at public goods, at least in like the digital public goods space, some argue they're considered network goods, but it's basically just what are the roads, tunnels, and bridges of the networks that we're taking part in. And so if we're talking about Ethereum, what are the roads, tunnels, and bridges that allow what's going on to occur within the Ethereum ecosystem? Because not everything can be privatized and make money. Some things, just like bridges, just need to be run and be able to break even. And the purpose of them is to be able to help make it easy so that people can drive their cars between places. And so to me, it's just the digital version of that. And there's a variety of things within the space that we need it for. And one of the things that I was fortunate to see at Gitcoin was we had done some statistics that showed that of the like $60 million that we had distributed at the time, that if you sat down and looked at the private valuations of companies who were once grantees and then went on to raise money from VCs at private valuation, and you also looked at market caps for tokens that had launched from projects that were also grantees, like a Uniswap, let's say, that you would be able to actually show that there had been a decabillion with a B dollar amount of global financial impact that had been created. There's different ways to argue how people would interpret that, but the reality is that the idea of turning something like 60 million into decabillion and sort of doing it unintentionally was something it always made me think a lot about, is that there's actually a lot of potential there. And so much of how we pay for public goods, at least let's say in the United States, I can only speak to the US, is, there are local, state, and federal bodies that are set up, and there's a tax code set up, and taxes are then paid through different avenues. And portions of those taxes are used to pay for roads, tunnels, and bridges, among other things. But because crypto doesn't actually have that, much of what we've had to do to be able to fund everything is really just based on charity. And while charity is something that I think should be encouraged, that we need to set up ways that we can make it so that the necessary infrastructure within this space is financially taken care of. And so to me, when I looked at, companies like Uniswap and Optimism and Yearn and MakerDAO and Bankless, WalletConnect, POAP, OneInch, there's so many successful companies that were Gitcoin grantees. Even while I was there, I had thought a lot about, what would it have looked like if we had invested in some of these companies and had some skin in the game? Because at the time we were running grants rounds on a quarterly basis. We would have different verticals of grants rounds. So there would be one for open source software, for Web3 climate, for decentralized science, for Web3 gaming, Web3 social. But my job was to be able to go out and to find organizations or individuals who felt strongly about funding these things. And especially because for the most part, it wasn't tax deductible either, right? So we had individuals and organizations giving 5 and 6 figure amounts to us on a quarterly basis to be able to distribute to projects working on compelling things in the verticals that these funders cared about. And it just was not a sustainable thing, especially when you think about the bear markets. That no one has $250,000 to give or $100K to give when that means a hire or more than one hire that they can keep for a year. And so the idea of this public goods to private greats to me was sort of that, was being able to use public goods to fund what were, private companies that go on to be great, where there's a lot of financial restitution that comes of that. And that you're able to use a part of that to then go back into funding a positive flywheel where public goods end up being funded. So something that, and it's funny, this article was one that actually have had a lot of hotly contested debates on Telegram. with people in various parts of the Ethereum ecosystem who messaged me after it came out, many of which disagreed with it. And I was like, well, having done the work, I at least for now, do not see another way to go about it. So I'm really hoping someone does that fund. Like if anyone here is listening, like I do think that the idea of raising a venture fund where the individual investors who are running the fund still have all of the incentives aligned in a way to be able to become personally wealthy will attract the best talent, and to have the rest of that money then be able to go out and further invest in things that grows pools of capital that allow us to sustainably have public goods funded just sounds like a fun thing to do. And especially in the ecosystem where so much of it is like cannibalistic and zero sum, seems like it would just be like a feel good job as well.
I'm curious, what were some of the arguments of those people in those Telegram chats? Why did they disagree? What was their counter argument? And then if you can also help me understand, like I see the parallel with, nation states for, we as citizens pay taxes and we get physical public goods like roads and, traffic lights, things like that. But then with blockchain, right, if we use, let's say, Ethereum, right, and we send payments with Ethereum, every transaction charges us a gas fee as well.
Yes.
Which, like, how is that different from a tax?
So the people that are getting the fees that are being paid is different because it's not going to some sort of centralized body. It has to do it like if you decide that you want to stake a certain amount of Ethereum and be able to take part in the network and then be able to take part in the fees that come from the network. It's different than I have no idea where either of you are citizens of, but like I live in New York. I have to pay state taxes to the state of New York, and then I have to pay federal taxes to the United States government on a yearly basis whenever tax time comes. And then they have a bunch of different bodies set up to make sure that, whether it's local, on the local end, it's, the libraries are funded, or that the potholes in the area get taken care of, or that public school teachers have enough money to get paid. And they figure out how to distribute those funds. Perhaps I have no idea how EIPs would work to be able to do something like this, or how you would be able to go about setting up trusted governing bodies that would be able to take portions of Ethereum fees that could then distribute them in a way that the community agreed with. But it's why I know that there's not direct parallels. And so it's having seen the difficulty of raising funding that we could distribute to things that were doing good stuff was like, how do we find a middle ground between incentivizing people who are the best at what they do to still be able to get rich, which so many people care to do. It's not to say everyone cares to do it, but if we can set up something where the incentives are aligned, where people get wealthy and good things are done, and we don't have to do just one or the other, where just because you want to do good for the world doesn't mean that you should have to live a life of poverty. And not that it's poverty, but I'm pretty sure like Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation really were pushing this early on too, was if the best and the brightest all want to go work at jobs that are going to pay them really well, and they have to choose between doing good for the world and being able to financially do well, why don't you find some sort of middle ground in that? And so the thinking that I've had, and it's not to say it's complete thinking, has really stemmed from being able to see how do we use sort of parallel thinking to what's gone on in the traditional world. Unlike many of the crypto anarchists, I'm constantly looking for ways to be able to take tried and tested ways of doing things successfully in other parts of industries or the world, and then see how we can apply it to what we're doing within crypto. And so sort of how I came to it. A lot of the arguments against it were just basically creating hypothetical scenarios where misaligned individuals would be there or misaligned investments would be made. But I kept trying to stress that this was a quick article that was put together. It's not like I had fully figured out what the exact thesis would be or how we would distribute all of the funds or any of those things. But it was just an idea to play with that uses capitalism, but at the same time still brings in those like Regen, ReFi tenets of being able to do good with funds.
and we'll dive into that some more later. But I do want to stay in the Ethereum lane for some more and maybe ask the question that's on everyone's mind, which is why another layer 2? And also, if you can maybe tell us a little bit about how can this like private grade impact coordination be achieved through Ethereum scaling?
Sure. So why another L2? Because there are like 200 of them at this point. I think that there's 50 or 60 last I looked on L2 beats that are on mainnet right now. So going back to my time at Gitcoin, I was very fortunate to get a chance to meet grantees that were at the earliest stages of their journeys through multi-billion-dollar companies. And I also was someone who was trying to sell software for grants and ecosystem development. So I was also talking to all of the Alt L1s. I was speaking to all of the L2s. I was trying to understand how are they going about ecosystem development? How are they going about grant distribution? What's working? What's not? And I always found things that I liked that some were doing and then things that I didn't like that others were doing. And it allowed me to put together what felt like a thesis on exactly how it is to create sustainable, healthy blockchain ecosystems. And so I broke it down sort of into 4 pieces. The first is you need a blockchain to build on, of which there are many to build on. But if you're a builder and you're trying to decide, you have to first figure out which blockchain you want to build on. Then you bring together a group of people who can create a software application that they want to build on top of this blockchain. And for the most part, what we've seen to date and what I saw a lot of while I was at Gitcoin was that these blockchains were able to raise initial funds when they first launched. And then they had to do everything they could to get TVL and users and transactions and all of those things on their chain so that when they launched their token, that the token would be able to do well and that they could keep the price of that token up. And that token would be akin to cash in some way because they could do treasury management with portions of the token that they still had access to. And then they would then use that to give out grants and hire people and do everything else that you need to when running a blockchain. But what I saw was that actually everyone sort of got stuck at this idea of trying to be like the main character in the room, right? Every single blockchain, if you go to any of these crypto events, the info providers host the biggest parties. They bring huge DJs out. They have the most expensive swag. They have the most expensive sponsorships. And that was very necessary because if you're competing with all the other blockchains early on and you want to figure out how to get the most attention so that you get that initial distribution so that your token can do well and then you have money to continue operations, it makes total sense. The problem is that in my mind, the idea of being able to create a successful blockchain isn't that the infra provider is the coolest person in the room, because I've never gone to an event in any other part of the world where Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud was trying to be the coolest person in the room. And it's always the software developers who build on top of them. And infra providers are supposed to just be database solutions at the end of the day for software builders. And so where we got to is we stopped at sort of builders, and then you give builders grants from like the tokens that you get and the money that you have. But really for this ecosystem to move, and it's something that there's been a lot of discussion around, is when are we going to get investment in consumer applications? What people mean by that, in my opinion, isn't really just like, when are we going to get video games on the blockchain, but it's like, when are we going to get something other than infrastructure, like another bloated infrastructure project that raised a bunch of money at a high valuation that launches a token, which is rich coming from me because we did that, right? We raised a $20 million seed round. It's a lot of money for a seed. But the way I've looked at it, and especially having spent time at Gitcoin, was you need to give the builders access to venture capital so that they can actually scale their companies. They can like build, launch, and scale companies and not just get stuck at raising 50 or 100K for a grant and then just stopping there. And then once that happens, they need to successfully launch a token, because, you know, the way the VCs and the ways that potential users and the ways that founders and builders of the company actually make money is that a token launches and that token can be exchanged or held and looked at in whichever ways that like they decide they want to look at value. But the problem is that we've gotten to this place where sort of the builders realize that they're not going to get access to that venture capital. And then being able to go into the exchange landscape is a completely different territory. And it's very difficult to figure out how you're supposed to launch a token on any exchange. And that was the main crux that I saw as I looked. I was like, there's a broken bridge here in these 4 pieces. And what we have is that builders will basically be incentivized, and it's what they're doing. It's a learned behavior because of the fault of the blockchains, not a fault of the builders, is that they look around and they're like, wait, I should just go to 10 chains. I should make a copy and paste on all 10 chains. I should go to their foundation and I should get as much grant money as I can. And then that's it. There's nothing else we can do, because even if we try to do the difficult thing of an actual product that has value and can work, we're not going to be able to raise the money that we need to be able to properly scale this company. So let's just raise a bunch of grant money and become grant mercenaries, the same way that there are airdrop farmers that are jumping from chain to chain. It's the same exact thing. And so the incentives have been aligned in a way that make people feel that they should do this. And so going back to your question was, why another chain? For me, when I was at Gitcoin, I was fortunate to have a lot of opportunities presented to me. But the idea that was presented with more was that they had been building this out for some months, and it was incubated by a large exchange out of Singapore. And they had an exchange, they had a large wallet, the second largest wallet behind MetaMask, and a variety of other companies. And so I thought about how the distribution side of not needing to spend all our time and money focusing on users, TVL, transactions, and everything, because we had a great distribution partner, the way that Coinbase does with Base, the way that Bybit and Mantle have a relationship. And so for me was thinking about how we could actually come to not necessarily need to focus on that distribution. We could focus on getting the builders. And my main thesis about this has been, how do we consolidate all of the resources in one place under the Morph umbrella that builders would need to create successful applications in a blockchain ecosystem? Because to me, having spent time at Gitcoin, I got to know the funds, I got to know the exchanges, I got to know the high net worth individuals, I got to know the DeFi protocols. Like, I had a chance to get to know everyone. And so I said, well, I know what everyone is doing. And in my eyes, what they're doing wrong is that when a builder comes to them and gets a grant, they're not saying, do you need access to media? Do you need influencers to look at this? How are you doing with raising venture capital? Do you want to get listed on an exchange? They're just sort of given grant money and then left to the wolves, right? Whereas our approach is different in that we're looking at being able to guide those projects. Because in Web 2, if you were looking to launch a successful company for years now, you would figure out how to move to San Francisco in the Bay Area. And if you were in a good position, you had a job at some sort of tech company, whether it was a startup or a FANG. And then on the side, you found people and you would build your startup, and you would take coffee meetings on the weekends, and you would try to meet VCs, or you would try to get into Y Combinator or one of the accelerators. And then you would try to get the initial startup capital, and then you would try to raise money at demo day, and you would raise that from VCs that YC brought in. And then you would go out and you would try to scale your company. But because there is no equivalent of move to San Francisco and have a job and take coffee meetings every single time that you get access to, we're in this place where there's a cost of decentralization. And to me, the lack of central hubs where all of the resources that are needed to be able to create success aren't in one place. They're in this digital sphere all over the place. That unless you're already in a position where I did great work, I tried very hard, I worked very hard at Gitcoin, but my job was just one such that I just happened to be someone who got to know everyone who has money in this ecosystem. That's not the case for most people. So I thought, what can we do to bring all those resources under one roof and then help builders actually scale applications? And so that's what we're going. And that's the whole very long-winded explanation for why another L2.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this approach of really supporting builders. And that's perhaps one of the biggest criticisms of the space, right? You mentioned the crypto parties and all that. And when you go to conferences, you hear often that there is more side events than dApps in the space, right?
Yep.
And we are nearing the DevCon season. We are right after Token. So I wonder, do you have any predictions maybe for DevCon, whether the space is going to, take that moment of self-reflection and maybe adjust a little bit? And maybe my second question is, and I know you tweeted something, I quote, merging the East and West of Web3 will be the biggest unlock that seemingly no one is paying attention to. So maybe can you also explain what you mean by that? And if you see that maybe coming into, reality at DevCon?
Sure. So starting with DevCon, I actually have a feeling that we're coming to the end of the consistent conference circuit. And I think that DevCon will be when it's sort of realized, because it's almost become a badge of honor to talk about how you're continually sleep deprived and on planes and living in hotels without access to any sort of like physical, mental, and emotional well-being routines. And I think we're finally hitting the point where people are realizing that there isn't actually a return on investment for doing that. There's been a lot of people who've been upset about a variety of things around DevCon. And I think it's less about DevCon or the Ethereum Foundation and more about how people are just burnt out from constantly being on the road. I mean, I am in at least one country a month. And what I find about going to most conferences is that from a vanity metric standpoint, it's amazing because you get to go, you meet with a bunch of people. Typically, you can only meet with 10 or 15% of the people that you plan to meet with, no matter how hard you try. And you meet a bunch of other random people. You get a bunch of good leads. You have a bunch of Telegram messages that you set up. You get back from the conference after being jet lagged for the first half of the conference. You get back, you're jet lagged, you're playing catch up. And while getting good leads is important, being able to close those leads is way more important. And the way that things are set up is that before you know it, there's another conference to go to and everyone's calendars are too booked up. And so you just continually keep going to these conferences, saying hello, meeting people, talk about all the great things that you're going to do together, spend your time in person complaining about how you have to travel too much, and then saying you should set up a call, and then being too busy to set up the call because you're setting up to go to the next conference. And I just think that DevCon will very likely be sort of that realization point for many. And I hope it is that we stop traveling as much because we can't get any work done. Now, I refuse to believe that anyone is efficient in getting work done while they live the life, because I know I have to, and I'm always on the road and there's so much that I don't get done and it doesn't work. So my biggest prediction for DevCon would likely be that people will complain a lot about the conference. They will complain about the speakers. They will complain about the weather. They will complain about everything. They'll complain about the traffic. They'll complain about the taxi. They'll complain about food poisoning, whatever it is. But a lot of it is a projection that's being done because they're tired of constantly traveling. And so my hope is that we get to a point where we stop traveling as much, because if you think about all of not only the money that you have to spend in terms of flights, hotels, food, sponsorships to go to, tickets for all these things are like $600, $800, $1,000 too. And then you get to the event and you meet with all the same people that you've been meeting with. And then you go to side events where you have to pay to be able to talk. And there's 12 people in the room, 8 of them on their phones. There's 4 people in the room that are listening to what you're saying. Maybe 4 of them agree with you. And what was the ROI for doing all of that, for going into rooms, spending a bunch of money where everyone agrees with you and taking coffee meetings with everyone who agrees with you? And then there's all the man hours that go into it too. Depending on what your salary is, there's an easy way to break down what each person is getting paid on a per hour basis. And then you think about all of the hours that go into traveling, eating, meeting, everything. And you pool all that together. And it's really just like VC money being poured into like the only product market fit that crypto has as being an events industry at this point. Like that's it, right? And so for DevCon, that is my prediction. And then for merging the East and the West. So I was mentioning earlier, we're incubated by an exchange out of Singapore. My co-founder is from Taipei, or she lives in Taipei. My CTO is living in Chiang Mai. We have developers from all over the world. And a lot of the initial user acquisition that we're going to do is going to be in the East in different countries within Asia. And because BitGet and BitGet Wallet, who are the exchange and the wallet provider that we're working closely with, though we have many other exchanges that we brought together, is that when I went to Token 2049 in 2023, not this past one, I remember walking around when it was still the middle of a very bear market, being like, it's not a bear market in Asia. Like, money was free flowing. Everyone was spending. People were excited. People were talking about what they're building. People were raising money. And I just think, and I wrote about this in 2023 for CoinDesk, is that there's this latent xenophobia that exists in Western crypto, where they view what's going on in the rest of the world as less valid or less legitimate because they don't actually understand how to critically analyze legitimacy in other parts of the world where culture is different. And so, a simple example would be in the West, everything runs on memes. Memes make sense and are very funny for people who understand that a meme is like 7 layers of an inside joke and that you laugh as hard as you understand the inside joke. Whereas people from the East, those memes don't make any sense to them. But what makes sense to them is airdrops. And it's a very legitimate, normal part of things is, proof of work, get paid for it, get airdrop. Whereas in the West, we look at airdrops and discussions of money in that way to be seen as scamming. And so being able to be in a team, which I am, where we're able to bring together both Eastern and Western culture and sort of trying to pick the best of both worlds and how we can go, we're doing all of the best legitimacy building and credibility building among Western leaders within crypto as possible. We held an event, one of the side events in Singapore, and we had a bunch of amazing people from Vitalik and Aya from the Ethereum Foundation and Stani from Aave and Mo from Aptos and Luca from Pudgy and Smokey from Barachain. Like, we had a bunch of amazing people, the Nansen guys who came and talked on those panels. And to be in that position, but also have like the Asia side set up is something that I think really has the potential to do a huge unlock. The Asian side has regulatory that's working much better. They, Hong Kong and Singapore are both much friendlier bodies for crypto. Japan is increasingly doing that. And so I think we've gotten to this place where everyone always thinks that the financial center of the world will continue to be the West. And I think that within crypto, we're seeing that's not necessarily going to be the case. And so if you bring together places where capital and everything exists in the West, and you're able to tie it together with hungry users who also have liquidity and want to do on-chain activities and are excited about what's going on, there's a very big unlock to occur. Being able to figure out because Eastern and Western culture are so different. There are so many cultural nuances that are absolutely different. So there's difficulties in doing it, but while not unlocked yet, I'm entirely convinced that it will be a huge unlock. And it's one of the things that we're working on very diligently.
I appreciate you bringing up that cultural aspect to your work and kind of breaking from that Western-centric vision, which I agree is very predominant in the Web3 space, but almost everywhere. And Therese and I are both Eastern Europeans and immigrants living abroad, so definitely appreciate the global take on the state of things and appreciate those nuances. But I want to move back to the philanthropy side of Web3 that we kind of touched on at the beginning. Crypto has a lot of critics, fairly so, I would say.
Understandably.
But what do you say to those who doubt the road of crypto in philanthropy? And can you explain what kind of a real world impact can be achieved by using crypto that wouldn't be possible to achieve without crypto? Can you provide some specific examples? Why crypto in philanthropy?
First, I would say I absolutely agree in so many ways with so many of the critics who think that crypto is just a big scam. There are so many things about it that are just a big scam because we don't have enough regulatory across the world that is there to be able to prevent bad actors from doing things. And we have, even if it's semi-private blockchains, and we have anonymous and pseudonymous people who aren't doing KYC for things, there's a lot of shady stuff that goes on. And I wish that more people in our industry were willing to call it out because I think that if more people outside got to see that people within the industry were also outraged by what's going on, I think it would make it easier for people not to be able to give like this blanket statement of the whole industry as being bad because of like this idea of these bad actors. And honestly, I would take it to like something as simple as stable coins. Like, we say we're doing consumer crypto and people always ask me what's going to be sort of the breakout application. I think consumer crypto already is there in stablecoin. There's continuous increasing volumes, more and more competitive stablecoins coming out. Last I looked, PYUSD that PayPal launched on Solana has like a 13% APY being backed by, one of the most legitimate financial companies in the West with PayPal, because they want to make sure that more and more people buy PYUSD. And if you think about how easy it would be for me to send either of you stable coins at this moment, we would be able to do it within minutes where you would say, I need this much. Here's my wallet address. I could send it to you immediately. And you would have the money while we were still having this conversation, literally minutes later. And then if we switched it and you said, Azeem, actually, can you send me some money through a wire transfer? And I don't know where you guys live, either of you, but it would be, what's your bank? What's your routing? What's your checking? What's your address? What's your IBAN? What's your SWIFT code? Okay. It's going to cost me $35 to send it. You're supposed to receive this in the next 3 to 5 days. To just talk about like, I think it was like, there's literally a statistic that it's faster to ship like, like a metal anvil that they used to drop on like the Roadrunner in the cartoons. It's faster to ship one of those to Japan from the United States than it is to wire money to Japan. And so when you think about stuff like that, it's just like, it's so easy to see that the idea of being able to have money moving more frictionlessly around the globe, especially in this economy that's so interconnected, there's just massive benefit for people. And to tie that into philanthropy is exactly that, is people who are facing natural disasters, people who are in places where extreme poverty is happening, people who are in places where war is going on, where hyperinflation is occurring. To be able to put those people in to be in positions where like they're unbanked or underbanked because the financial infrastructure doesn't exist. I live in New York. Every other block has a bank branch. But if you think about what it takes to actually launch a branch of a bank, you need the plot of land, which is expensive. You need to build on top of the land, which is expensive. You need all of the computers, which is expensive. You then need to hire people who can run all of those things, which is expensive. And so actually the idea of running a bank within the Western notion of how so many of us see it, actually an extremely expensive endeavor. And so if you're in different parts of the world where that's not necessarily the case, then the idea that you can use simple things like being able to get people to onboard to and understand crypto wallets, and that even if it's not them needing to be sent money for philanthropic purposes, if they have a way to be able to store their money in one place, if they have a way to hedge against inflation by changing their local currency to a different currency, if they can put that in an interest-bearing account, not something that is earning you 200% year on year, maybe it's earning you 2%, but earning 2% is way better than losing 100% like they're losing in Turkey, right? And so to do that, or to bring them into credit and lending markets, it was Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace, the Nobel Prize for his work on microloans. And it was how economies can completely change being able to give loans that like could be as little as $50 to people. And the ways that things like that could be incorporated if you're able to do things in a frictionless manner, where if someone needs a $50 loan, but it costs you $35 just to be able to send them a wire transfer, you're not going to be able to really accomplish the things that you're looking to. And so to me, a lot of it is, when we did the UNICEF round, we were able to get money to companies that are working on very interesting problems. When we did the work with the American Cancer Society, it was sort of different umbrella companies within the American Cancer Society got access to being able to get funds that were donated to them by the community for things. And there's a bunch of ways that people are, just sending money. There was the campaign with the Ukraine that Gitcoin did that ended up, it was just prior to me joining, or it was just when I had joined. but they donated a 7-figure amount of money. And so being able to pool funds together and send them to places. And I think, I've seen UNICEF does $600 million worth of cash transfers on a yearly basis, which means like they're giving out over $600 million in cash, primarily through Western Union and MoneyGram, who are taking large chunks of money from the people who are getting access to it. Imagine if these people could easily just be sent stable coins and they had local networks where they could transact with each other to buy bread. And so when I think about a lot of this, it's really being able to take away a lot of the friction that is needed with the traditional financial system that we're here accustomed to in the West, and removing like the ignorance that everyone in the world should operate this way. And then being able to give them technology that can hopefully leapfrog the need for ever having the same bank branches, while still being able to onboard them to the global financial system. Because to me, it would be a form of philanthropy if you can bring 10 million, 20 million, 50 million, 100 million people into basic credit and lending markets.
I totally see your point with reducing that financial friction, sending money to someone in need fast and with less fees and so on. But what I'm curious about to understand better is, okay, let's say you send a bunch of stable coins to someone who just, had, a major hurricane and they're, in major rebuild phase. But then these stable coins still sit in your wallet, and to use them in the real world, right? These people in need have to go and off-ramp the money into the fiat to actually use it. Yeah. So how does that impact translate into that? That's like my first follow-up. And the second one, in the case of the UNICEF pilot partnership, can you talk more about what does it take to kind of integrate some of those Web3 solutions into these more traditional institutions like the UN and so on? What are some major challenges that you've seen, and how can they be fixed, improved?
So for the first one, I completely agree with you. It's very difficult to take money that is sitting in a crypto wallet if you're not dealing with people who also are using crypto wallets. And off-ramping that money is not necessarily always easy either. We did a pilot when I was at Gitcoin in Oakland in the Bay Area, where we had 7 or 8 nonprofits who had never interacted with crypto, knew nothing about it, be in a position where they became part of a grants round that we did for local organizations within the city of Oakland. And we ended up distributing something that was like a couple tens of thousands of dollars, nothing super massive, but we educated everyone on what it was that crypto was and how it was that crypto could be used and things around that. And they ended up being able to raise some money after this education. And what it ended up resulting in was their local farmers market to date still transact in stablecoins. And so to me, a bunch of off-ramping honestly has to do with being able to get more regulations in place, like being able to OTC things and how that changes taxes. Or if you want to off-ramp, you usually need some sort of centralized exchange for the most part. But at least within the US, when you're doing anything with centralized exchanges, there's so much around regulatory compliance that's needed. I live in New York State and there's only 2 exchanges I can use that are Coinbase and Gemini. I have never had access to Binance, never had access to FTX. And it's because of exactly that. And so even for myself, I have not been paid in, so UNICEF paid me in fiat, but since the end of 2020, I have not been paid in fiat otherwise. And it's a nightmare. Like it's a complete nightmare. So I think the reality is honestly, as much as like one part being education, or if we can set up more places that are just accepting and using stable coins and people seeing and feeling it as real money, that will be one thing. But the second part will be getting regulations in place, which is typically not something that people in crypto want to talk about. But to me, I think they're absolutely necessary pieces of the puzzle and being able to get real crypto adoption, because, and this goes into sort of the next question, is that risk mitigation is the most important thing that a lot of these organizations are operating with, whether it's JP Morgan, who needs to make sure that if they allow financial transactions on blockchains to take place, that they're not helping unknowingly facilitate money laundering for a drug cartel or for a North Korean hacker organization. That they're not doing that because that would be very problematic, right? And there's no simple ways to do that at the moment. And then there's also just, on the philanthropic side and all these like large organizations is that crypto really wants to move extremely fast and they're willing to break things along the way. And it goes back to something I was saying earlier, which is that I am always happy to be able to take success stories and analogies and examples from other parts of the world, because I don't think that we need to burn the system down in order to start a new system. I think that there's a lot of things that have been done right where there were reasons that many rules were put into place. And so working with an organization like UNICEF is very slow. Like everything moves very slowly. But a lot of that is because of rules that have been put into place because of mistakes that were made in the past. And crypto's in this place where they think that for whatever reason that they've figured out something novel and genius. And then they just sort of keep making the same mistakes that people have made in the past in different industries and aren't really willing to learn from them. So yeah, for the first question, I'd say a lot more education. And then secondly, we need more regulatory advocacy and compliance that allows for legislation to pass so that off-ramping doesn't just mean having Coinbase be able to do it for you. And there's a variety of ways to do it, or it's seen as legal tender to begin with. And then for the second question is, and this isn't just companies like UNICEF, it's across the board, is they need to make sure that they're covering their bases and they have much red tape and rules in place that at times feel very difficult to deal with, but that if you actually go back to try to understand why it is that they have those red tape and rules in place, that there was junctures at which something happened that made them put something like this into place to make sure that they can mitigate the risk of doing things. But they're still open to it. Many of them are opening up more to it. Like, UNICEF has had their crypto fund since 2017. They hold Bitcoin and Ethereum. Last I looked, I think they might be holding stable coins now too. And they have been investing in companies, and it's more like a rigorous grants program than it is a venture arm, because they can't hold equity. And they've done a great job in investing in companies where there's gender parity for the founders that they're investing in. And companies have gone on to raise follow-up funding and are actually earning revenue in numbers that are probably better than most venture funds would be able to show you. And so if an organization like UNICEF is thinking this deeply about that, then I think that it's only a matter of time before way more organizations as a whole come out with what their crypto plans are.
And since you're talking about institutions and corporations, I do want to ask, because when you were head of impact at Gitcoin, you were kind of leading the charge on the Shell deal with Gitcoin, which happened last year. And I remember, having participated around myself, like long and long discussions on Telegram, like seeing a lot of like angry tweets about that because Shell donated a big matching pool to one of the rounds. So yeah, we'll look back at it, and what maybe are your thoughts on everything that happened?
I thought that the Shell deal was one of the best things that I have done in my career. So, Mike, to recap, we came together with Shell and ideated on what it would look like for them to give us money that we would distribute in Web3 climate rounds. And we had decided on $500,000 that they would give us, that we would distribute $125,000 a round for 4 rounds. That the matching pool money would not be mixed in with all other capital. So it would be opt-in for builders or grantees if they wanted to get the additional money from Shell. And that Shell had no say in how that money was distributed. So if either of you had set up a grant that said that you were going to sue Shell for what they've done in different parts of the world, they couldn't do anything to stop you from getting that money. And they didn't give us money that was tax deductible. It was actually research and development money, which meant that for them, this was actually an experiment. And we're in a place where, and it's like this in all business, is that you're not going to do a $20 million deal before you do a $10,000 deal or a $500,000 deal. And we did a $500,000 deal that was going to last a year. And it would have been something that had things, Gitcoin leadership and my position in my opinion, handled it very poorly, because I think what we did wrong first was we miscommunicated things. Like the logo for the marketing was a Shell logo on top of a rainforest, right? I can absolutely see why people were upset, right? That is like, it seemed like greenwashing 101. But had we easily communicated, hey, this money is not mixed in, grantees don't have to take it. By the way, 90% of grantees had opted in to be able to get those Shell funds. So everyone who was upset was very different than the people who were sitting there saying, yeah, I could definitely use those extra funds. And it was, from their end, it was fascinating going through the deal. There were calls where we had 13 attorneys on the call because they had attorneys who specialized in each point of what they were talking about. They spent more than $500,000 in just setting the deal up. For them, this was super interesting. And Shell is another one. They've had a blockchain team of proper Regen people that have been there since 2016, right? Like Shell's blockchain division has been around longer than Gitcoin has been around. And so, for me, a lot of it was miscommunication on our part. And part of that I take, blame for, is that I should have been more involved in being able to effectively communicate the deal to the community. But then when heat started to hit, instead of leadership saying, we are sorry that you feel this way. Here's the reasons that we actually spent months making this deal happen. And here's why we think it's still a valuable deal. We hope that you will, come to terms with it. They ended up, just throwing the deal under the bus. And I ended up leaving after, but it doesn't look like that relationship was ever really reconciled. And so to me, it was a massive missed opportunity. We closed and I led the deal, but I didn't do it myself by any means. And it was, multiple people on the team who were involved in being able to bring that to fruition. I was just the main point of contact and leading the deal. But we did a 6-figure cash deal with a Fortune 10 company as an obscure DAO based out of some random Caribbean island in terms of incorporation, and, has no end owner. And so for me, it was upsetting the way that it played out, but it was awesome to see that there is appetite, even from Fortune 10 companies, to be able to understand this space, to be able to dive into this space, to experiment in this space, and to start seeing how they can be involved moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you for your honest perspective on this. It's super interesting to kind of look back and analyze and, evaluate the difference in perspectives. What you mentioned about the Shell crypto division and how long they've been around, and some of the people in the Regen space being upset, that kind of brings me to this big debate going on in the Web3 world, right? The Degen versus Regen binary.
Yes.
So I'm curious, where do you stand in this debate? And do you even find it helpful at all? And besides sort of your stance in this Degen versus Regen rivalry, can you talk a bit more on your opinions on the ReFi space as a whole?
Yeah. So I find a lot of the Degen versus Regen stuff to be not overly educated on this, but to seem like a lot of the capitalism versus socialism debates that you end up hearing about in college campuses and in other parts of the world. And it's two sides who are willing to relent that there are any issues with their ideology and that everything should be exactly as they see it. And the world needs to live in this hypothetical vacuum the way that they feel that it should, because in the perfect reality in their heads, if the world worked this way, then everything would be perfect. And that goes for both sides. That's not just for one side. And I've always been more of a realist and more of a pragmatist. So I used to have to defend this point a lot, but using the Shell deal is that, I think it's great that someone may feel differently than me when it comes to whose money we should and shouldn't be taking. And I do agree that there are lines that you probably should not cross for whose money should and shouldn't be taken. And so I wouldn't take Andrew Tate's money. Andrew Tate has been criminally accused of doing a lot of things that I don't want associated with us. But if companies are operating in what's considered completely legal ways, I'm not here to make arbitrary moral decisions about how things get funded. And having been in the position where I was having to decide on a daily basis if I wanted to choose between grantees not getting access to any funds or me being in a position where I close a deal with someone like Shell, like there were actually like tens of millions of dollars that I actually said no to, where I was like, this is not something that we should be associated with. This is absolutely reputational laundering. This is absolutely someone trying to find a way to, wash their hands clean of things that they've done. And this is just not money that we should have associated with us. But a lot of this Degen versus Regen debate ends up coming down to different forms of idealism. And I'm always just like, I don't, especially when I was sitting there fundraising, but even now with the work that we're doing, is that this isn't a classroom. This is, and particularly it's not an Ivy League, ivory tower classroom where we're having debates about hypothetical realities. To me, there's going to be things that I'm probably going to continue to do wrong. There may be things that I've already done wrong that people would disagree with. I think that's completely normal and okay. Like we're human, that happens. But in the process of trying to do good and do better for things, you have to be willing to experiment and you have to be willing to do things that people might not agree with. And so in the entirety of the debate of like this Degen versus Regen thing, I always just sort of sit squarely in the middle. I do agree with a lot of the Regen people, that all we do is speculation in this space and it's just a bunch of gambling that's going on from insiders who have access to information that others don't. And it's value creation for a very small select few number of people. But at the same time, I also think that some of the criticisms of the Regen people, where is the money going to come from? Where? Like if you're not willing to go across the aisle with the people that you might disagree with on certain things. I think it's also part of the last couple of years of culture is like, you're either 100% with us or you're 100% against us. It's sort of the tone that most people take on things. And I'm someone who just doesn't think of the world as that black and white. I think that a lot of the world is gray. And, there are a lot of opinions that everyone has where you would be able to find the gray in those opinions. And I just think oftentimes people are too afraid to communicate those at times, unless they're in like very private setting. Whereas I'm someone who will probably get in trouble at some point for being as straightforward as I am about the things that I say. But I think that we don't do ourselves any good by pretending like everyone is a bad guy or a bad woman if they don't agree with us. And so the Regen versus Degen debate, I don't think it's anything new. I think it's just a new iteration for our niche of arguments that have been going on for long before I was alive.
That's a really interesting reflection about the black and white view. And I think that, Regens, we often talk about positive sum games in this space, right? Mm-hmm. And they usually don't come from excluding someone or kind of projecting to engage in conversation. So I think that's a really good reflection for us as a space. And as we wrap up, I'm wondering, is there a maybe impactful or regenerative concept or a project that you would really like to see built?
Nothing that I can say specifically. Honestly, the way that I see it is that my job, at least at the moment, and I've been spending a lot of time meeting with builders in our ecosystem individually. And instead of just thinking about how they can make money, I'm asking them about their background, about how they grew up, what they're working on, why they're working on it, why they might be the right person to work on it, what information they might have on why it's a good idea that I don't have, and asking and seeing how is it that I can help distribute resources to those doing it. I had a call a couple months back with the most senior blockchain advisor to the president of a country in Latin America. And on that call, he asked me, so what is it that you want to do in our country? And I said, well, I don't know. I said, I've never been to your country. I don't speak the language of your country. I don't know the culture of your country. And taking the opposite stance of the ignorant American who thinks that they actually know everything that you might need in your country that I've never been to, I'm actually going to say, I have no clue. And what I want is for you to tell me what might be needed. and how I could go about unlocking resources that I have access to help make that happen. And that's sort of the stance that I've been taking at the moment, because I know Western culture extremely well. And for now, within Western culture, what we see after 13 or 14 or 15, whatever years of development that we've had within the crypto space, for the most part, we're still just mostly using it to do gambling. But I think 7 out of the top 10 countries with stable coins having usage are based out of Africa. I think it was something like that I looked, right? So who am I to say what different African nations need? I can look at research reports on the block. And so for me, it's actually looking at what seem like they would be impactful projects in different parts of the world. I'm actually much more interested in what's going on in Latin America, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in different parts of Asia than I am what's going on in Western Europe and North America. And so I can't actually say what I think would be those ideas. It's more so that I'm hoping that builders have those ideas and that we can talk about it. And I go, of course, that makes sense for the cultural context that you have. But as someone who was born and raised in New York, basically, and spent my whole life here, I don't know. I don't know.
I feel like this is healing me because I feel like this is breaking a cycle that, we've seen in even industries like international development, right? There is this famous case where in an African country, I think it was the UN that brought tens of thousands of mosquito nets, right? We want to eradicate malaria here. You guys need more mosquito nets. And what they didn't realize is that they actually, due to that, a lot of local businesses making mosquito nets went out of business. And it was extremely damaging to the social fabric locally. So it's really nice to, kind of hear these opinions of okay, you guys need to tell me what you need. And instead of, us having a list, okay, you need this wallet, you need this exchange, and then there's no adoption, right?
Exactly. Because to me, I think that they're going to know what they need as long as they understand what the technology can provide for the cultural context of where they are. And what's going to be needed in Argentina versus Nigeria or Kenya are going to be different. But I don't know what's needed in any of those 3 places if I've never been.
Beautiful. Awesome. Well, Azeem, thank you so much for sharing that. We have just final section, which is our rapid fire questions. We have 2 of them, so we're just going to shoot. Are you ready? Awesome. What book are you currently reading?
Right now I'm reading The Poor Man's Almanac. What's it called? It's Poor Charlie's Almanac. It is the book it's a Charlie Munger book, a bunch of the essays and talks from Charlie Munger, who is famously Warren Buffett's business partner throughout the majority of their careers together. He was sort of the behind the scenes guy that Warren Buffett would tell you is the actual smart one between the 2 of them.
Very cool. And second question is, what excites you the most about your work?
I see us analogous to a record label in that we are something like a universal music group. And I am very excited to find and empower the Drakes and the Taylor Swifts of what we do.
We need to quote that somewhere. I love that. And what's your, maybe one lesson or a mantra that has really shaped you as a person?
You can do good for the world and do well financially at the same time. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Definitely big props to that. And what a great note to conclude on. Azeem, thank you so much for providing your take on the industry, from crypto philanthropy to these arguably unnecessary binaries that exist in the Web3. And I totally agree with a lot of points that you brought up. So really appreciate your time. And we'll make sure to link your profile, your projects in the episode notes so that people can find you. And maybe one of our listeners is going to start that venture fund that you brought up at the beginning.
I hope so.
That's a call to action. Are there any other calls to actions you wanted to add to that?
We're going to be going to mainnet soon in the next month or so. Please check out the testnet, and reach out to the team.
Thanks again.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for joining.